So, just a bit of information real quick. Had things gone as planned, you guys would have gotten a great big long 1 hour video. But unfortunately, and it was a video requested by a subscriber, but I'll talk about that in a minute. Unfortunately, when I went to process the video and everything, I put it into Windows Movie Maker because it's all I have that works on my shitty computer now. When I went to put it into Windows Movie Maker, it said it was going to take over 300 minutes to process. So I figured, okay, I'll just leave it overnight and let it process overnight. And it did process overnight. And when I went to proof watch it this morning, apparently I either fucked up somewhere or accidentally deleted or something fucked up. But it didn't start the video at the beginning of the video. It started on a secondary clip or a third clip or whatever. And I had lost one of my recordings that was the beginning of the video. So I don't really feel like uploading an unfinished, chopped up video that jump cuts straight to some other secondary topic. So I have to reshoot the whole thing. And I'm not reshooting an entire hour video. So I decided, instead of doing what I was going to do, which was a Resident Evil Monster retrospective where I talked about many creatures throughout the Resident Evil series, I figured maybe just a top 10 would work for you guys. This video is a permutation of a request from one of my subscribers who asked to be anonymous. He wasn't anonymous in the other video, but he's going to be anonymous in this one because he decided he wanted to be anonymous for some reason. Anywho, this is a permutation of a video request. I do take requests, but do me a favor, do not flood my comments with requests. Send me a personal message either here on Facebook, PSN, Xbox Live. Send me a personal message, say, hey Brett, would you like to talk about this? I would like to hear you talk about this, and I'll consider it. And if I do say, hey, that sounds like a good video topic, do me a huge favor. Number one, have patience. Your idea is going into a list of ideas. It's not necessarily going to be at the top of the fucking list. And number two, try not to pester me about the video. That's really pretentious and condescending towards me. I'm not just some slave that pumps out content for you guys. I do have a life. I do have things I have to do. And in the instance of this, I'm having to reshoot this whole fucking thing. I'm not making it an hour long though, sorry. My bad. But let's be honest, that other video was a little long-winded and kind of boring in some of the sections, so I figured I'd just shorten it up, talk about my 10 favorite creatures in the Resident Evil franchise, and that would be a little bit better. So hopefully you'll enjoy this video a lot more than that last one. But again, I do take requests. Do not put the requests in the comment section. Send me a fucking personal message. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about my top 10 favorite Resident Evil monsters. One of the reasons you play Resident Evil is, of course, for the creatures and the combat. I would say that there's three main things to a Resident Evil game. There's, of course, and these are all one point, the story, the atmosphere, and the levels. You know, you have the overarching story, the atmosphere of the environments, and then you have the environments themselves, whether it's a spooky mansion, a training facility, an entire raccoon city. That's one aspect of why you play Resident Evil, for that atmosphere. The other aspect is, of course, for the puzzles and the exploration. You want to explore these environments. You want to solve puzzles in these environments. And the third reason is, of course, because the monsters and the combat. So today I'm going to talk about the monsters. At least 10 monsters from the Resident Evil series that I personally really enjoy. So we're going to start off with, you guessed it, zombies. Zombies are a staple of Resident Evil's history. They are the quintessential monster of the games. They're usually the low-level, most common creatures. They're kind of like grunts in the Halo series. But the simple fact of the matter is, they're very iconic. I mean, ever since Dawn of the Dead, you know, George Romero, ever since zombies became a mainstay staple of entertainment, they've been very iconic. I mean, you can't throw a dead cat these days without hitting some zombie-related thing. We've got zombie books, we've got zombie games, we've got zombie movies, we've got zombie TV shows. And it seems like ever since The Walking Dead became a hit, I've seen other shit like Z Nation pop up and try to ride the gravy train, but it's not working for them. But zombies in and of themselves are iconic as all fuck. And in the Resident Evil franchise, there's at least, I've seen, 3 permutations of zombie. I'm going to talk about my least favorite first, and that is the C-Virus zombie from Resident Evil 6. They're zombies, they're cool, but they're just a little bit generic by the time Resident Evil 6 came around. And the only interesting thing about them is how they react to the Simmons boss fight at the end of Leon's campaign. That's really the only cool thing about them. However, the T-Virus zombie is a little bit more hardy and it's staple in the franchise. You've had T-Virus zombies ever since Resident Evil 1. They've been in 2, they've been in Code Veronica, they've been in 3, they've been in 0. They've been all over the place. And the really cool thing about the Resident Evil T-Virus zombie that I love is what they did with them in Remake, where they created created the Crimson Heads. Now, I'm going to lump the Crimson Heads in with the zombies, even though I know some people will probably think of them as two different creatures, but I don't. I think of the Crimson Head as being the culmination of the zombie, much in the same way a Tyrant is the culmination of the T-virus. It feels to me like the zombie is kind of like a pupa phase, or a metamorphosis phase, until they get to the Crimson Head. And one thing people always criticize about, one thing that people often criticize is Operation Raccoon City. They complain about its gameplay, they complain about this, they complain about that. I like Operation Raccoon City. Why? Because it has quite a few of my favorite monsters, including a few more I'm going to talk about in this video, and it has Crimson Heads. Crimson Heads are fucking cool, they're fucking scary, and they are a permutation of the classic zombie. Just much more aggressive, they're violent, they have giant claws and fangs, and they run after you. And they're called Crimson Heads because, of course, they're really red and steaming. I can only assume their metabolism increases and they get really hot. Kind of like if you've watched Attack on Titan, the Colossal Titans, this giant steaming monster. But the zombie in and of itself is a Resident Evil staple, and it's one of my favorite monsters, and it's the first one I'm mentioning on this list. The next creature that I want to talk about is, of course, a creature that was introduced in Resident Evil 2 and has had just as much of a franchise impact as the zombie, and that is the Licker. The Licker is this grotesque, fleshy, veiny creature with massive claws, a long tongue. Its brain is exposed and pulsating. It has huge fangs. It has the ability to crawl on walls and the ceiling. It moves around on all fours, but it's also capable of leaping across the room and cutting your fucking head off with its massive claws. The Licker is horror personified in that it's so alien and so unusual and so freaky, and the first time you encounter one of these things in Resident Evil 2 is relatively early in the game. These things are fucking scary, but they're also really unusual and really tension-filled, because when you enter a room and it's quiet and you don't know if anything's in there, and with the camera angles you can't tell if anything's in there, and then you hear that very quiet oh god, that hurt. When you hear that creature in the room, you know that there is something going to get you. The Licker has been in Resident Evil 2. It's been in Resident Evil 5. It's been in Operation Raccoon City. And it's had different forms and different functions. Hell, Lickers are even in this, which you should watch. And it's just really interesting how they designed this monster. One of my biggest problems with it, though, is how it turned into a fucking bullet sponge in later games. In Resident Evil 5 and Operation Raccoon City, they are in fact bullet sponges. They can take so much damage, and it's so unfair. But I really do love the Licker. The only problem I have with the creature is in the fact that it's technically blind. It has no eyes, no visible eyes. And I've always assumed that it has a sensory organ either in its brain or in its tongue. If any of you have ever watched Tremors and seen the Shriekers, the creatures that the giant graboids let spew out of them and everything, the Shriekers will open up their head and they have infrared sensors in their brain matter. That's one aspect of the Licker that I think exists. Or it could be the tongue comes out and there are species of snake that use their tongue to sense infrared and stalk their prey. But I think the Licker in and of its design is really interesting, really scary, really cool, and it's probably one of the freakiest monsters ever. I mean, we all remember when we played Resident Evil 2, walked by that window and saw one crawl by. It's very scary. The next creature I want to talk about is one that I don't think has shown up nearly as much as I would like it to, even though it's been in several different games. It's in the original Resident Evil, it's in Resident Evil 3, only in a different form, it's in Resident Evil Revelations, and I think there are some in Code Veronica that you can completely avoid if you're good at playing the game. And that is the Hunter. Now, there are several different variants of Hunter. You know, there's the M1 Alpha Hunter and all this stuff. Oh, there's some in Dead Aim too, and they look really weird. But the Hunter has had many different forms. It's this very reptilian monster with giant claws, a tiny head. It shrieks at you. They're fast, they're vicious, they have leap attacks, kind of like the Licker. It seems like the Licker was a permutation of design from the Hunter. And they're just really interesting. But I think the interesting thing about them is the different variants you can have. For instance, you have different types of Hunter, which are base level the same, but they're referred to differently in different wikis, because I actually had to research this shit. But you have, in Resident Evil 3, you have the Black black hunters that had the red fleshy, pustules all over them. You have the giant frog-like hunters, which I think are technically a different thing, but I just call them frog hunters that show up in games like Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 3. You have the very strange, goofy-looking hunters in Dead Aim. You have the very formidable and frightening hunters that are in Revelations, which are able to cloak. You have a lot of different designs, but what it is at the end of the day, it's this big, brutish, bulky beast, and it's very interesting to me. And I've always enjoyed fighting them, even though that they can be a little bit difficult if you run into more than one. You need a shotgun in that situation because it's got the kick. But hunters are really awesome, and I've enjoyed fighting them throughout the series, and I hope to see more of them in the future. One of my fourth favorite creatures is actually a boss. And this boss is in Resident Evil 1. And it is Yawn, the giant snake. If you've ever played Resident Evil, whether it's 1 or the remake, you know for a fact there's a giant snake, and it's a giant zombie snake, and it's a giant poisonous zombie snake, and it can either eat you or poison the fuck out of you. This thing is just really interesting to me. They even had an homage to it in Resident Evil 6 with another giant snake, even though this one could cloak, kind of like that version of the hunter in Resident Evil Revelations, and even another creature that I haven't talked about yet. But Yawn, in and of himself, is very frightening, especially its remake iteration. It is, of course, a giant snake. A lot of people are freaked out by snakes. Me personally, I never had a problem with them. I think that snakes are actually very beautiful creatures. I kind of like them. But with a lot of people, they think that they're slimy, they think they're gross, and the idea of a giant one that could either swallow you whole, constrict you till you're dead, or poison you is quite frightening. But I think the interesting thing about Yawn is its name. I've always gotten a chuckle out of the fact that its name is Yawn. You know what Yawn is, right? Yawn. I think that concept is, if it doesn't kill you outright and eat you, its poison will make your stupid ass go to sleep. And so Yawn is a very interesting monster. I thought that when they redesigned it and made it even more terrifying for a remake, it was even more frightening. And it's just a really interesting creature overall. It's a very memorable boss fight. You run into it twice, and it's just a giant, frightening serpentine monster. And it's really cool. You need to play remake. A lot of these monsters are probably going to be from remake. For the fifth entry in my top favorite monsters, and these aren't really in an order greatest to worst or whatever, they're just in the order I decided I want to talk about them. I'm actually replaying Resident Evil 3 right now on hard, which is a real bitch to do on the Vita, because when I'm playing on a normal controller, I have a modicum of control over what I'm doing, but on the Vita, I'm so scared that every time I hammer buttons to try to break free from something, I'm gonna break my fucking Vita. So I'm actually a little gentle, and I have to play more smart and dodge and not get caught and not get grabbed. The number of times I've refought this monster I'm about to mention is infuriating, because I'm trying to get all the weapon parts he drops. You already know who I'm going to talk about. I'm talking about Resident Evil 3 and dropping weapon parts, and he's a boss. Who is it? Nemesis. Nemesis is so interesting to me. I like Nemesis so much that oftentimes I have bitched about Pyramid Head in Silent Hill 2, calling him a Nemesis clone. Nemesis is iconic. He's on the front of the case, for fuck's sake. You would think they would want to keep a monster like that secret, but no. They put his name in the title, and they put him front and center, because they want you to know you're going to be stalked that entire time. Nemesis is one of the first instances I've seen of someone taking what I call the Scissor Man concept and putting it into a different type of game. Scissor Man, of course, is from Clock Tower, and he's an entity that follows you throughout Clock Tower. He's frightening, and you have to either avoid him or fight him in different ways. Nemesis takes that concept to the next level with a Tyrant level monster in the Resident Evil series, and I think that's really cool how it pays homage to Clock Tower. If you've never played Clock Tower, you need to play Clock Tower. But Nemesis is frightening. He's got this inhuman, cold, calculated design to him. When he sees his target, all he says is, "Stars." And then he goes in for the kill. The way he takes Brad out is fucking horrifying. I remember the first time I saw it, and I was like, well, shit. If it had not given me the choice to run into the police station the very first time I played that game, I would have been like, ah! But Nemesis is interesting not just because of his design, but how he changes over the course of the game. He is relentless. And even when you've blown him up multiple times to the point that the tentacle plaga shit in him is mutated and he has full-on Japanese tentacle rape going, he still doesn't stop, infecting Jill in the process, giving her T-virus superpowers. And even later in the game, you blow him apart and he falls into a vat of chemicals and mutates even further, and when you finally fight him at the end of the game, he feeds off of another variant of Tyrant Tyrant and mutates even further, becoming an absolute amalgamation of flesh and horror. Nemesis is fucking cool. You need to use a fucking rail cannon to put him down for good, and even then you have the option to put him down with the Magnum. I'd like to see some sort of canon where somebody didn't put Nemesis down with the Magnum and he shows up in a later game. I think that'd be really interesting. For number 6 of my favorite, monsters or bosses, I mentioned Nemesis, of course. Well, now I want to talk about another thing that's kind of related to Nemesis, but not quite the same. And that is, of course, the Tyrant. T-Virus stands for Tyrant Virus, and Tyrant is the culmination of what you can make with the T-Virus. To put it into perspective, how many of you have played Final Fantasy VII? Do you remember breeding chocobos? Alright, you remember how you get a bunch of greens and blues and blacks, but you were really going for the gold? The gold represents a tyrant in the Resident Evil universe. It is the absolute perfection of what Umbrella can create. And in Resident Evil 0, you run into a creature called the Proto-Tyrant. I remember the first time I ran into this fucking thing freaked me right out. Being stuck in that little bitty cage and having to decide whether or not you are going to get good or die. And in Resident Evil 1, you have another tyrant. I've always heard people complain about these things. They bitch because, well, why would you design a bioweapon with a herniated organ? There's actually a scientific reason behind it. They're fucking mutants! They mutate. Their bone structure and muscle structure changes at an alarming rate and pushes the organs out of their body. Yes, it's a big, giant Zelda-style fuck-me spot, but it's scientific. Well, I'm not actually talking about the imperfect tyrants. I'm actually talking about the TOO variant tyrant, aka the thing that's in this movie that you need to watch. The TOO variant tyrant is fucking cool. Number one, they're mass-produced. When you played Resident Evil, you saw but one canister fall out of that helicopter's transport and fall through the police station. There were 5 other canisters, weren't there? That means there's 5 other tyrants they're releasing into the city that you get to fight in Operation Raccoon City, because I love that game. Anywho, when it comes down to it, the TOO variant tyrant is mass-produced. It's much more intellectually capable. It is perfect. They are massive humanoid entities, and the coolest thing about them is not only that they're mass-produced and they have their neat little outfits, but the simple fact is those are power inhibitors. It's actually canon that they have power inhibitors, because in the game, when you do enough damage to a TOO variant tyrant, its power inhibitor will break and it will mutate exponentially, growing giant claws and becoming even more of a monstrosity, even getting the herniated organ in some instances. And I think that's really cool. I love the TOO variant tyrant, and it's fucking cool as a monster. You guys definitely need to either play Resident Evil 2 or check out this movie. I will not stop sucking these movies' dicks. They're great. For the number 7 spot, I'm actually going to split it between 2 different creatures because they're so similar. And those 2 creatures are either the Neptunes from Remake, not the Neptunes from the original Resident Evil. Those aren't scary at all. They're fucking stupid. The Neptunes from Remake and El Lago. The reason I want to lump these 2 creatures together is because they're subnautical monsters and they freak me the fuck out. Let me paint a picture for you guys. When I was a little boy, somebody thought it'd be a good idea to let me sit down and watch Jaws. And ever since seeing a movie where a giant shark fucking eats people, I've had a severe fear of deep water. I'm not lying, I'm not bullshitting. I don't like the ocean, I don't like rivers. If you're getting me in water, it better be in a bathtub or in a fucking swimming pool where I can see the bottom, because I have a severe fear of deep water. And when I played Remake and saw Neptune, holy mother of God, it freaked me out. This giant cylindrical place. That's another reason that Resident Evil Remake is awesome. The atmosphere and the environments. This giant cylinder-like pool of water where these giant mutant sharks are. That's freaky. But let me paint another picture for you. I'm playing Resident Evil 4. Holy shit, there's Spaniards everywhere. And then I get to the lake, and I'm like, oh fuck, please no. And I had to go across the lake. And then it pans out and shows something giant swimming under Leon. And I have a fucking shit fit. El Lago is a giant salamander. In and of its design, it's not actually scary. But when you couple in the fact that I'm scared of deep water, that boss fight bothered me so bad the first time. Replaying it now, it's not a problem. But the first time, it really did hit on an integral fear in my psyche. I do not know why somebody showed me Jaws when I was little. And to this day, I do not go into the ocean. Fuck the ocean. So, of course, the Neptunes and El Lago at number 7 for my favorite Resident Evil monsters / bosses. Speaking of Resident Evil 4, a lot of the monster designs in Resident Evil 4, in my opinion, are really derivative. That's why I say that the hour-long video you guys were going to see was actually kind of boring and disjointed, and I even got a little bit ranty, bitching about how I hated the fact that Resident Evil 4 has nothing but dudes, and more dudes. A few ladies, but mostly dudes. I mean, you've got the Ganados, you've got the Zealots, you've got the soldiers. It's really fucking boring. But one interesting thing that I like about Resident Evil 4's enemy designs is, of course, all the different types of plaga. So when you have an instance where you shoot an enemy's head off in Resident Evil 4, one of 3 different variants of plaga will come out. You have, of course, the tentacle shit, you have the spider things, and then you have the giant head thing that will literally bite your head off. But I'm not actually going to talk about the Ganados and shit from Resident Evil 4. I actually want to talk about a different enemy type, and that is the Gyarados. These things are cool as fuck. First and foremost, they're borderline Wolverines with their giant claws. But secondly, they're blind, so they can't see you. They have to use their sense of hearing in order to locate you. So popping off shots or running will alert them to your presence. And the cool thing is, they're completely invulnerable from everywhere except a spot on their back where their plaga is exposed. So you have this really interesting type of gameplay where you have to quietly stealth your way around these enemies and shoot them in the back. If you watch my channel, no doubt you've seen the little clip from Resident Evil 4 where I fought 2 of them at once. I love this design when it comes down to enemies and gameplay. It's really fucking cool, and I love the Gyarados a lot. Speaking of, Resident Evil 4's monsters and how they mutate and split their heads up and have tentacle rape all over the place, a lot of people are going to get mad, but Resident Evil 6 monster variety is fantastic when you get outside of Leon's campaign. Granted, Leon has the mutating zombie types, for instance. With the zombies, you have the Bloodshot, you have the Screamers or Shriekers or whatever. Those are actually pretty cool. I love those. And you have the Whopper. I love saying it like that. Whopper. But when you get into either Jake's campaign or Chris's or Ada's, you'll be fighting mostly Javo, or Yavo, however you want to pronounce it. These humanoid enemies that have guns. And in and of that, those are really boring and derivative. But the thing I love about the Javo, all of them, is their ability to mutate during combat and turn into chrysalids to become even more monstrous versions of themselves. So, for this list number, all the Javo. I love that the Javo can mutate. Their heads can split open and form into bug bodies. Their arms can turn into giant mutant bat things that they whack you with. I love that their legs can turn into giant grasshopper legs or those fucking super ninja kick legs that they like so much. And when they turn into chrysalids, they can transform into one of 3 other variants. Now, I don't know the names exactly, but there is the brute type enemy, which is large and has steam pussing out of it, kind of like the Crimson Heads. They're big, they're mutants, they're brutes. Then you have, of course, the things that I refer to as the Raptors. You know what these things are? They got the giant frill shit and they spit stuff at you and they run around and have a tail. Those things are fucking cool too. And the last variant, which you don't get to see too terribly much, it doesn't show up very often, is of course the giant mutant crow things. I never can get a good look at these things, but I absolutely love them. The Javo in Resident Evil 6 have great designs and they transform during combat, making the act of fighting an enemy much more diverse and much more interesting. I love the Javo. They're really fucking cool. And when they transform, they're even more cool. But you were probably wondering what my last pick is. So we'll talk about number 10 in just a second. Now, I stated that these weren't in any particular order, but I saved this one for last because this one is probably my favorite monster / boss in all of Resident Evil history. We've talked about the T-Virus, right? The T-Virus creates a multitude of creatures. You can create zombies, you can create Crimson Heads, you can create giant mutant sharks, you can create the Tyrant. Well, the T-Virus has nothing on another virus, aka G. What's G? Well, if you watch Resident Evil Digitation, you'll get an idea. Or you can pop in a copy of Resident Evil 2 and see it firsthand. G is much more powerful than T. I don't really have a comparison here. All I can say is with T-Virus, it can make some pretty insane monsters. But with G, you can make borderline Cthulhu nightmares. My tongue made a weird noise just now. I don't know if y'all heard that. Borderline Cthulhu nightmares. There we go. This is my tongue doesn't make a fart sound. Anywho, I'm talking about William Birkin. William Birkin is my favorite monster throughout the entire Resident Evil franchise, not just because of how formidable and persistent he is, even more so than Nemesis and an entire game before Nemesis. Don't get me wrong, Nemesis is awesome, but Birkin is better. I love him not because he's a beast who is also persistent, but because of the fact of how he transforms throughout the game and how he can make other people's lives fucking suck. Anybody remember that poor dumb bastard who locked himself inside the prison cell? You know that guy, that reporter dude? Yeah, he has a horrible death no matter what character you're playing as or what scenario you're playing as. He dies horribly. And the interesting thing is, Birkin literally infected him with G, and he had a parasite grow out of him, burst out of him, and turn into a completely different G monster, which you take it out depending on which scenario you're playing as. I think it's B scenario. No. It's A scenario, because I believe in B scenario you're fighting Birkin more so. But with Birkin, he mutates monstrously throughout the campaign. I believe it's B scenario where you fight him the most, and the first time you encounter him, I do believe he's relatively human. A bit bulky, yes, and with his giant mutant eyeball arm, but Birkin himself is already becoming a monster. The next time you encounter him, his head is somehow mutated and shifted down into his chest right here. A new head is sprouted. His arms have become big, black, and are growing these massive claws, and he has these tiny arms slowly protruding out of his chest. And that's just the beginning of it. The next time you encounter him, the little arms have grown even bigger. His other arms are massive. They have giant claws. The head is more pronounced. The face of his once human head is still there, contorted in agony and pain. And of course, he doesn't even look vaguely humanoid anymore. Later in the game, you will run into him, and he has started growing spikes out of his chest. And at the end of, I believe it's A scenario, he finally mutates onto all fours with his small arms out, and his spikes and his head and everything, and he looks like a giant demon, devil, dog beast. He looks horrifying, but that's nothing compared to his final form on the train at the end of, I believe it is B scenario. He becomes an absolute Orwellian nightmare. This giant glob of flesh, DNA, and just an amalgamation of all your nightmares. This huge beast that's just pulsating with giant eyeballs and spikes and teeth and tentacles, and all he can do is drag himself through the train car to try to get to Sherry. It's an absolute nightmare. Birkin is awesome. And if you haven't played Resident Evil 2, I feel bad for you. It's also a reason I hope Capcom doesn't fuck up Resident Evil 2 Remake, because I want to see what Birkin looks like in pretty-ass graphics. Anywho, this is a different variant of a video I was going to do. I hope it's a lot more enjoyable than that other video could have been. I hope that you enjoyed hearing me talk about some of my favorite creatures from the Resident Evil series, and I am going to get back to making some more videos shortly. I have to take periodic breaks because, of course, I'm looking for a fucking job. But thanks for watching. Drop me some likes, drop me some dislikes, maybe a comment or two. What are your favorite creatures in the Resident Evil franchise? I genuinely want to know. Do you like some monsters that I haven't mentioned here? Do you think some of the monsters I mentioned are absolute cunts? Nemesis. What is your opinion? Let me know. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the support. Do take care. And again, this was a request from a subscriber. Sort of. I kind of manipulated the shit out of what he asked for, I think. But I hope he enjoyed the video regardless. And if you didn't enjoy the video, let me know. I'll try to do better next time. If you have a video request, send it in a personal message, either here, Facebook, Xbox Live, PSN. Please don't put it in the comment section. It annoys the piss out of me. Thanks for watching. I'm going to edit this and upload it for you. God, Birkin's awesome.